And we are live. Welcome to the Killer Be Killed podcast, the least listened to podcast on the interwebs. We've got a very special show today. First, we got to welcome back George
What's up,
from
everybody?
his brief hiatus, and my good buddy Mike. Mike is, I guess you could say, Mike and I have been going through fatherhood together. Um, his son and my son are very, very, very good friends, and yeah,
So are
Mike's
we.
also yes. So of course, Mike's kind of like the local historian, and I want to kick off the podcast. Setting this up, and while we're having this conversation, uh, over the last, I would say, several years, started kind of looking at things a little differently in terms of, well, good and evil. I mean, we deal with self defense, we deal with, people doing just awful things to good people. And, we often look at the environmental factors that create these things, or the economical factors that would push somebody to a certain, to do certain acts. But then there's just stuff that's just, well, it's just unexplainable. And my personal journey, uh, really started with. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Good. 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 Because I had some sound. So my personal journey with this really kind of, this all kind of kicked into high gear with COVID. It's starting to hear how quote unquote facts are manipulated, and then there's misinformation, and then there's malinformation, which is actually factual but could deter you from the overall agenda of what you're trying to achieve. And you're like, what is driving people to do this? What is driving you know people to make these decisions? It's beyond greed, it's power, it's all these wrapped up, but it's you know there's larger forces at play here, and that's what just brought me back to good and evil. Yeah, I would say I'm probably your average Roman Catholic, got confirmed, got my kids confirmed, not particularly religious. Never, I mean, I'm sure there was some point in my youth where I was like, thinking, the whole God is dead thing. But I've always believed in God. I've always believed in that there is a devil. Um, in my opinion, you kind of can't have one without the other. Um, and the more people I talk to, definitely in our age group, and these are like very, very, very successful people. I was just having a conversation with a good friend of mine this past weekend, and we've never talked about this, but I kind of knew, where he was, in relationship to God. And then I started just going out on a limb, and just said, okay, what if everything in the Bible is true and happened? And I go, what if everything in mythology happened? Right? I'm just, playing devil's advocate with myself, because I think that we have a tendency to reflect on our current reality, and people that were living, thousands of years ago, what was a reality? We only know from, let's just call it, I think the general consensus, this is what happening, is that there was a massive flood, right? I mean, it's in basically every culture, you know, uh, every, has, they all have very, similar running themes, things coming from the sky, a flood, large, beings, giants and beasts and things like that. You're like, okay, you're looking at okay, so there's a flood event. What was the earth like before that? Now when you think about, well, fossil records and things like that, I go, even if you took, like, you know you would think they've discovered like thousands upon thousands of, Tyrannosaurus Rex bones, or even hundreds. And to best I can recall, they've found remains of 18. T-Rexes, right? So let's just say, wherever you are in the dinosaur thing, whatever, but more than 18 lived, if, if that's what you're saying. So, what is missing, right? You see, civilizations that have, now that we're using LiDAR and some other technology, we can see down in South America where there was these massive structures and civilizations that were just, that just became consumed by nature. So that said, I really am just exploring the idea that, there is good, there is evil. I'm not exploring it. I mean, it's a reality, but, you know, where are we in all of this, and how is, it playing, how is this playing out? When you look at it, and I know there's guys on this call, specifically Mike and Josh, who are, really, extremely well versed in this. And I'm probably going to shut up soon, but you've got, God gives us free will, right? And then the devil can do pretty much everything else, right? He's got to, he's got to trick us, he's got to entice us, and then how far does that go? And then I'll throw this out there. Now you've got people like Elon Musk saying that there's a, it's a 1 billion to 1 chance that we're not in a simulation like the Matrix. So if that's the case, that's even more evidence towards, this battle. It's not a game. It's a freaking battle between good and evil. So that kind of like, Mike and I've had, quite a number of discussions, on this topic. And then Josh, talking about how our country can be, basically it was the blueprint to subvert a nation over a series of like decades that we're seeing come to fruition. And then Mike looks at it from a spiritual standpoint. He's like, hey, man, he's like, send me over that chart that Josh had. So, and that's what prompted all of this. So, where I'm at now is I'm like, this battle's been raging on, and I feel like I'm just kind of waking up to it. So, no, that's,
All right, Mike, take it away.
Well, I think so. So to piggyback on that, you have, the pyramid that you had, Josh, right, with the long game for communism. That's kind of like a microcosm of what's been going on for the last 6,000 years. And the long game is the deception of evil over good. And you kind of have to go back to the beginning, right? I mean, with everything, you kind of have to go back to the beginning. And you could fall into one of two camps. You could believe that there's a creator and that there's a heavenly father, or you could believe that there's not, and this is just randomness. That's just haphazard. It was a bang. It came about, and evolution and all that other nonsense. But when you look at everything, everything has a purpose. When you really look down at it, and everything, it's not random, and it's a master plan, and it's a genius master plan, like beyond genius. And when you kind of look through that, and you could see like just everything, cells, plants, animals, everything just goes there. There's a rhyme and a reason for everything. There's no, this didn't all come out of a single cell and evolve into all this where we are today, at least in my opinion. And if you believe that there is a creator, you go back to his word, right? Which starts in the beginning, right? Let there be light. God said, let there be light. And when you look at that, that's frequency. Speaking is frequency. And everything we are is an electromagnetic environment. And we are in this electromagnetic world that everything is connected and everything is energy. And there's high energy, there's low energy. And when we're depleted of energy, we're weak and we're weakened. And that's what gets us sick. And that's what makes us, that's what makes us clouded in our brains. And that's what opens us up to be weakened and to be able to be susceptible to deception. And the deception that's genius too, in a way. It's not as a great genius. The devil or Satan is an imposter. And what he's always done is try to emulate God, the creator, but he can't. So all he can do is try to imitate him, and he's a bad imitation. So everything he does is to pull us away from the truth of what we are. And it's been to disrupt us, and it's to keep us off balance, and it's to keep us weak. I mean, to Damian's point, thinking about all this stuff through COVID kind of really was an eye-opener of the deception, saying, what's going on here? And it was not the run-of-the-mill, just graft and corruption.
Right.
It was real crazy, evil stuff that
at the cost of people dying.
Of course.
Still, I mean, they're uncovering what has been going on. I mean, with the, let's get into the, we can get into the vaccine. The VAR's reporting. I mean, it was like, I just learned this today. The VAR system, is time consuming. And according to the Harvard Medical Journal, it's like 99% underreported. But the vaccine injury reported for the COVID vax, that number reported is more than any other vaccines reported combined since its inception.
Well, nobody's probably there hasn't been that volume of taking a vaccine. I mean, 6 billion people, 5 billion people on the planet took that vaccine. So, I mean, the numbers are crazy.
Well, actually, if you look at just the United States alone, how many kids are like, I mean, I know I didn't vax my kids.
Me neither.
But, so I didn't know that. Oh, but, when kids are born, they pump them up with a whole bunch of shit. I mean, it's like by the time between they're born and when they're 18, they have like something like 69 to 85, different vaccinations, which is insane. So, they, it was like they really didn't care. When I went to, so I had COVID, of course, my wife never got it and neither did my son, but I don't know. I went and I was under 55 at the time. And I'm like, hey, what about monoclonal antibodies? And I'm looking at the doctor and she's like, I can't give them to you because you're not over 55. I'm like, well, and now I'm like, you can't treat me. I'm like, who decides that? Right? I'm like, who, why is that? Why are we turning sick people away when they're like, go get sicker? How is that, what doctor in their right mind, does this?
Well, that's part of the deception.
I agree.
And the doctors have been deceived. The deception is so layered and it's institutionalized, and it's been going on for thousands of years. This isn't new. It's accelerated tremendously through the internet and the ability to reach people instantaneously, which we never were able to do before. And I mean, within the last 50, 60 years, let's say, and especially now in the last 10 or 15 years, it's exploded where everybody has something that they can look at instantaneously and scroll, and it could be whatever it is, and you either believe it or you don't, right? But but to the explosion of the evilness that has come out, we're just like, even politicians, you'd say, okay, these guys are scoundrels. They got their hand in the till. We know that they're not for the public, but that was the worst of it, right? They were just robbing people. Now they went crazy. I mean, they went crazy with a lot of things. I won't name them, but they went crazy with a lot of stuff that was just bizarre. And you're saying, where's this coming from? How does this happen? So you got to kind of unpack that, and you look back through it and you go, something's wrong here. And it kind of just opens up a Pandora's box of all this stuff. And we could probably talk about this for the next 30 years because there's just so much there, and there's so much ability to sidetrack you onto an offshoot that is a diversion of more deception. So, you look at it, and as I said, you got to go back to the beginning, and you got to go back to believing either you believe that there's a creator or you don't. And then if you do believe that there's a creator, you got to look at it and you say, well, the Bible lays it out. God gave that to Moses, and spoke to Moses, and Moses wrote Genesis. He wrote Exodus. He wrote those first books of the Bible, and he basically was the scribe for God up on the mountain. Yep. Go ahead.
Can I comment on something?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're definitely focusing on a Christian point of view, which, you know, makes sense because I think we're all Christians in this podcast. But you know, the point is, so if you you go back to two choices, right? There's a creator, there's nothing, right? Even if you look at any religion in the world, right? Take whatever religion you want. There's always a creator and a creation, and there's always a good versus evil story. So regardless of whether you believe the Bible's real or you believe in Norse mythology or whatever, right? There's always a creator and there's always a good versus evil. So
right. But then again, when you look at that, Josh, a lot of that stuff, going back to what Damian said, those are gods with a lowercase g. Those are there's one God, there's one creator. He's the creator, and he created all this other stuff. And if you go back to the mythology where Damian's talking about that it's real, right? There's really, in my opinion, there's two timelines. There's before the flood and after the flood. And there's a world before the flood that we don't know about because it was wiped away.
It was wiped away.
Just look at the destruction that took place down at the Guadalupe River. I mean, their stuff is buried under 5, 6, 7, 8 feet of gravel and dirt, trucks and cars. They're just buried, and that's not even deep. Think about 200, 300 foot, wall of water coming through and just ripping everything apart. And when you look at that, it wiped everything off the face of the earth. So we don't know what was there before. But those tales,
the only remaining records we have are the God King epics and the which include the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that's pretty much all that remains.
Well, the Epic of Gilgamesh is post-flood, and one of the things that remain pre-flood is like the Book of Enoch. There's certain books that survive pre-flood that they've removed from the Bible. Again, it's a deception. They're trying to keep the truth from us. And the Epic of Gilgamesh was Nimrod, who was a descendant of one of Noah's sons, who they went to Mesopotamia. Noah had 3 sons, right? There were 3 sons with 3 wives. One of the wives was unclean. One of the wives didn't have, pure DNA, human DNA. And she brought along to the new world the old tales and the old stories of the gods and all of that. And that survived through that lineage in the Mesopotamian Middle East area. And Nimrod, who was one of the first kings of Babylon and Mesopotamia, claimed that he was 3/4 God and 1/4 man. And he ended up marrying his mother. And he went back, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and there's different names to everything. But what he did was he went back to Noah. He went on a journey to Noah. They don't call him Noah, but he went back to Noah to learn about the flood. And he learned firsthand about the flood from Noah. And that's where that tale comes into the Mesopotamian Epic of Gilgamesh. And that's the tale. Now, his rendering of the ark and all that stuff is very different than what is laid out in Genesis. And interesting enough, I was talking to Damian about it. Right. The Epic of Gilgamesh's ark is a cube. And they've done studies on this with the dimensions of the ark listed in Genesis and the dimensions of the ark listed in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh's cube, you're dead in 5 minutes. It's a cube. It goes in the water, it flips over. There's no stability there. If you look at the ark and the way that's laid out, and they've done this, I believe, in San Diego at the Naval Academy out there. They made a rendering of the ark. It could sustain waves up to 200 feet. It could pitch 90 degrees and not flip. This thing was designed by a epic creator who knew what they were talking about and laid it out and gave it to Noah to build. Right, and it took them 120 years to build the thing. And when you put all this stuff into perspective, it kind of ties it together. These aren't separate stories. And if you look at it, God was correcting the record and maybe in a way by giving the story to Moses and laying it out the way it was. Because when you look at it at the Epic of Gilgamesh, it doesn't hold water, or actually it holds a lot of water, and it doesn't work. And when you look at that through the time, all this stuff ties together. Everybody alive today is alive because of those 8 people that exited that ark. And That's
it's interesting because, I always try to back stuff up with science if possible. Not
Absolutely.
everything can be proved scientifically, but so I got my DNA done, my genetic DNA, genealogy DNA done. And there's a bottleneck. Everyone has the same bottleneck, and there's a bottleneck of DNA that occurs, and everybody has it.
What do you mean by bottleneck?
So your DNA, it'll be like you have, this much DNA going back this far, and then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a bottleneck, and then it widens out again, and it says, okay, you bottlenecked in this location, and then it widens back out usually towards like, Mesopotamia, right? The breadbasket. And it widens back out. And so, there's certain areas around the world where, you basically fall into one of, 3 or 4 groups, and you end up in this bottleneck, and then it widens back out. And so it's like, why was there this weird bottleneck in this one spot? And it's not in the beginning, right? It's not like, oh, well, here's the beginning. Now it's small, and then it gradually gets bigger. It's big. Right. It slowly gets smaller. It bottlenecks really small, and then it gets bigger again.
Right.
So,
right. Wow. And that's a perfect example. If you look at it that way, right? Where there was 2,300 years from creation to the flood. And we're about 4,200 years from the flood. And if you do the anthropological math, you come to about 8 billion people, where from that time, 4,200 years ago to the present. Is it exact? I don't know, but it's pretty interesting how that plays together.
Statistically, it's almost impossible.
Right, but it works.
But it works. Yeah, exactly.
But it works, correct. And that's the crazy thing, right? To your point, I don't look at things. I'm not looking at things in a fantastical way, and I'm looking at things through actual information that can be verified in a way, and it has to be looked at in a certain way, because a lot of it's just been disavowed. It's just been, it doesn't, no, we're billions of years old. We're millions of years old. The planet's so old. But a lot of stuff that they find just doesn't, when you actually dig into the real information of it, the story that they tell us doesn't make sense, because right. the actual facts belie what they're telling us. And and that's why it goes back to, starting me on this journey. I grew up with, like Damian, a Roman Catholic. My parents were devout Catholics. Grew up in a very, devout Catholic household. And, I was always a skeptic, and I have a brother who's 8 years older than me. And I told him when I was about 4 or 5 that there was no Santa Claus. You know what I mean? And he still doesn't forgive me to the day, because I was a little kid, like, there is no Santa. I saw Mom and Dad putting the stuff under the tree, and, he's like, you ruined it for me, and, and it got to a point in time in my life. And I always believed in God, and I always believed in Jesus Christ and all that stuff. But there got to a point in time where I said, how can this be true? If we're on a ball spinning at 1,000 miles an hour at 66,000 miles through the universe around the sun, who's 94 million miles away from us, and everything was a random event of a big bang of evolution, there can't be a God. There can't be a creator, because there's not, and that's what and so thinking about that kind of brought me back to, well, this doesn't make sense. Like looking at the sun, I would, I watch the sun, I watch the moon, and I watch these things, and I go, I see them move across the sky, and I'm looking at the sun, and I'm going, I don't know how far away it is, but I there's no way it's 94 million miles away. And how would anybody ever measure that? You know what I mean? It's like, how do you get that number? So looking at it and seeing it, it's right there. Even the stars, they're right there. When you really look at them, when you really look at it, and you see, you have to suspend everything you've been taught to believe.
Well, in order to do that, right, you would have to discount like whatever mathematical calculations they use to calculate.
Yeah, but how do you calculate distances? It's bullshit. I mean, it's how do you calculate something that you could never get to, right? It's like being in where you are right now and never have been, or nobody's ever been to Istanbul, and you're saying, oh, it's 14,000 miles away. Well, how do you know? You're just making up a number because nobody's ever walked there. Nobody's ever been there. I know we have, and I'm just making that as an example. But how do you know? You don't know. Nobody's ever been to the sun. Nobody's ever been close to it, And to think that it's 94 million miles away just doesn't make any sense. And to think that that thing's traveling at 800 and something thousand miles through an endless universe, and we're chasing it along with all the other so-called planets, but everything above us looks the same.
I mean, I could make the argument that God also created that, right?
But that's not what he said. Yes, you could.
I get that.
You could.
I get that.
But that's not what God clearly told us how he made how he created everything.
Right.
So when you look at that, that's a deception, because what does the devil want to do? The devil wants to pull us away from God and make God insignificant and make God, mock God. So it's a brilliant plan, and he's instituted it over forever, and people have just started to believe it, and then it becomes institutionalized, where you look at it and you say, "You're crazy. You're crazy, Mike. What are you talking about? Everybody knows that this is that and this is that. What are you talking about?" Right? But do we ever really look at it? We're kind of just born to believe it and to accept it. And then they instill it with the movies, with astronauts and all this other stuff, going to the moon and going to Mars and going to all these other things. And when you look at that, it changes what we're taught, or what the creation tells us it is. It's clear. And when there's science behind that too, they've done experiments where they've actually ripped water apart. And when you rip water apart, it produces gas bubbles that illuminate by doing it. And what was done in creation was that God separated the waters from the waters and made dry land, and then put a firmament over it. So when you separate those waters, you're making this illumination in that water, which sounds like stars to me. And all this stuff, there's math, and there's things that, if you really look in it, it's an amazing, insanely brilliant creation. And the one star that doesn't move is Polaris, the North Star. That's always above us. It's a North Star. It doesn't move. All the other stars rotate around it, but it never moves. So they had to explain that. So that's why they said the Earth's on a tilt of 12 degrees and it wobbles a little bit, so that they can show that that's why the reason that we can always see the star. But and who's supposed to sit above Polaris is God, heaven. Heaven sits above the North Star, and that's in the Bible. So all this stuff is, if you look at the way everything is told to us, the story that it's told to us, it belies what we've been told. So if you believe that, that's almost an affront to the Creator too, because you're saying you believe in and I'm not saying you personally, but I'm just saying,
right.
If you believe in the Creator, but you don't believe in his creation the way he told us it was done, that's an affront to the Creator, right? That's a slap in the face. That's saying, I believe in you, but I don't believe in the way you told me you did it.
I mean, in order for this to, again, the playing devil's advocate would be, well, the Bible was created by man to manipulate man, right? So, that would be the first thing that would pop into my head, right? So, when these things are put down, it's like, hey, I'm going to put my own spin on it, or, because I've got my own agenda, like Council of Nicaea, what goes in, what goes out, we're already editing this thing. So, we want to, make it jive with, a way to look at it is what we can sell to the people. Right. And then we're going to base it on traditions that they've already, they're, the Saturnalia and Christmas and all that stuff. We're going to line up our holidays. We're going to, kind of bring over some of the stories that were in mythology, and, just make it more palatable and something that they can understand, so one of the things I want to get back to, just when we talk about creation, It was like, even if you go back to the beginning, whatever, I mean, now there's like, they're talking about multiple big bangs or whatever, but the reality is whatever started it, right? I mean, science, even at its foundation, is based on faith, because they're just guessing. They don't know.
It's theory, right?
Right.
Yeah, I always, so what I always tell people is, like, matter can't be created nor destroyed, but something had to be created at some point, and that's where you find, no matter what you believe, that's where you can find God, right?
Right.
Because something had to be created at some point.
Correct. And it was, and it's an intelligent design. It's not a haphazard. It's not just this random thing.
All right.
But Damian, sorry, go ahead, Josh.
If you don't mind, we don't have forever to talk about this, and we could spend literally hours on this. So let's assume in the last 20 minutes, we've established that the creation's real, spirituality is real, God's real. Now, how does this all play into a good versus evil war? And how do we address this? All right, take it, Mike.
Right. Well, it's more good versus evil is definitely the foundation of it all. And that's the rise and fall of it. But it's the deception that keeps us from the creator. And, and back quickly to Damian's thought about the Bible being created by man, and it's driven to whatever agenda that they wanted to tailor it to. Yes, there's a lot of books in the Bible that were clearly written by people, and they're not saying that they were the word of God necessarily. They might be reporting on Jesus, or they might be reporting on certain things that took place. But Genesis in the early books of the Bible were dictated to Moses by God. That's the word of God, right? So that's what we're being told. And interestingly enough, a lot of the books have been manipulated, but they haven't really manipulated Genesis. And if you look at that, that's almost a slap in the face. That's almost looking at it saying, okay, we're gonna leave the way you did it, but I'm gonna make everybody believe it differently. And that's almost a big FU to the creator by the deceptor.
Now, popped into my head, what's the oldest written version of the Bible? Obviously, we don't have Moses' homework.
Well, the Torah. I mean, there's early, look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, or you look at, you look at things like that, and it goes back, and those things are intact, and they're almost verbatim. There's certain deviations from that. But yeah, to Josh's point, we can unpack this forever. But I think when you look at, if you want to fast forward, you've got to look at, but you have to look at these bases of things, because these are the basis of the deception. And these are the foundations of what we've been taught. And what we've been taught has been taught to deceive us. And if we don't look at things through the clear eyes, there's deception everywhere. And we're being deceived almost everywhere we turn. Everything that we're being told is almost a lie. And there's a lot of good people out there. And there's a lot of good people who are spiritually good people, but there's so much deception going on, and
so
that's
Mike,
stopping people from being able to get close to God and being close to that. And when you talk about self-defense, the biggest thing, yes, we all want to be strong, and we want to be able to protect ourselves and our family from crazy maniacs or somebody who's going to try to exert their will over us, right, physically. And that's a real thing, right? That's a real thing that goes on. And if you don't prepare for that, and you don't understand how to take care of yourself, you're going to be in a world of hurt. And you still may be. You never know who you're going to encounter, or how many you're going to encounter. And you may not be able to overcome that. But the other side of that is the mental and the spiritual side. And if we can't defend ourselves against the deception and the evil that's out there, and we can't defend our families from that, we're susceptible. And the last thing we want to do, I think we don't know how long eternity is, but it sounds like a real long time. And I think the last thing any of us would want to do is to be in the wrong place for the rest of eternity. And I think a lot of people think, well, I believe in God, I'm a good person, but I don't know if that holds water just because you think you are, or you think you believe in something. And if you don't believe in it in the way that we're taught to believe in it, or that we're meant to believe in it, and to honor our Creator, and to live in a just way in His love. You mentioned free will, right? And the reason we got free will was because without free will, you can't love. There can't be love without free will. And God is the God of love. So He bestowed us. He knew the mayhem that was going to come along with this by allowing people to have free will. But He did it because He knew that that's the only way you can have love, because you can't force somebody to love you. The only way somebody can love you is if they freely do it. And they have to have the free will to do that. So it's the good and the bad. There's the good and the evil there too, right? And so, this is very complicated. We can't unpack this in 36 minutes or probably even 36 hours. This is a long-term thing. But I think that self-defense and defending ourselves, we have to look at the spiritual side, but we have to look at it the right way. And we have to look at it the way that it was intended for us, and not the way that it's been expressed to us, because I think we've been deceived. And I think there's evil out there always trying to pull us away from the Creator, period. That's what it is. The more he can pull us away from the Creator, the more they win, and the weaker we get. And that's why we get poisoned with our food. That's why, all these things are being done to make us weak, and to make us our minds weak, where we can't see past this deception because we think it's normal, right? And it's crazy. I mean, I'm just scratching the surface on all this stuff, but I've gotten to the point where a lot of shit's been ruined for me, because I look at it and I go, I can't watch that. That's evil. I can't watch this. I can't listen to this, because it's you listen to it and it's just this, it's this business that's being designed to normalize evil. It's designed to normalize the immoral and normal. And it's in our TV, and it's in our movies, and it's in our music, and it's in our everyday, everyday society. And they keep trying to push this on us. And to the point where either we accept it or we're the bad people, right? It's either you accept the way I am, or, you're the bad person, shame on you. And I'm not saying we shouldn't accept everybody, or, I'm not here to judge, and I'm not expecting anybody to be a judge. That's not our job. But I think we have to look at things and not be fooled to believe that it's that easy. I mean, even what Jesus said, don't be deceived, don't, hear my word, but don't be deceived by imposters. And, that's why God said there's no false gods before I. You can't have idol worship. And I think a lot of religions out there do that. I'm not going to speak for other religions, but I know the Catholic religion does that. They have 1 million idols. There's 1 million idols that they have. And that's idolatry. And that goes back to the gods with the small g, that these people were here on the planet, and they thought they were God. And they came down here, and they were doing their thing, and they had power, and they had superhuman power, and they had supernatural power. And they were able to, they screwed everything up in 2,300 years, or however, when they came down. They were doing the monitors and all that stuff. When you look at that and you say, wow, that's crazy stuff. We're kind of doing stuff like that now. We're making genetic freak, combinations now. We're bringing back animals supposedly that were, have been dead for thousands of years, and we're making them hybrids. And
look what we did with the wolf.
Right.
There's like every dog is a genetic experiment. That's not what was,
maybe not. God, the Creator made dogs. You look at that and you go,
but there's the Victorian.
A wolf is a wolf, and a dog is a dog. A fish is a fish, and a bird is a bird. It's right. I think these things I don't think there's been any evolution at all. I think dogs were made for us. Dogs are our best friend.
No, but what I'm saying is, like, during the Victorian era, when they started breeding and making dogs and experimenting, that was genetic. We've been doing it with plants forever. So to think that, again, we think of our technology as being the pinnacle, but then again, when you look at, the pyramids, where the only the only way people are talking about constructing the pyramids now is not by cutting and moving those blocks. It's about forming concrete, so that's not, that technology to build those, is gone.
Right.
I mean,
That's
we don't
probably
know.
pre-flood.
And
all that technology is
also
pre-flood.
the fire at the Alexandria Library, library in Alexandria, that took a ton of crap out. Who knows what's in the basement of the Vatican?
Right.
They have a basement, but I mean,
Oh yeah, it's miles long.
Those dudes have been collecting stuff forever, and they've been, God knows, literally God knows, what's in there. I mean, we think about, now, one of the things that stuck in my head was like the idea of oral tradition and passing things down and writing things down. I'm like, right now, again, when people try to do it now, they can't, because look, I used to memorize phone numbers. I used to have I could memorize like 30 phone numbers, right? I don't even know my kids' phone numbers now. Like, technology has replaced that, and I've lost that skill. I used to be able to, I mean, I still kind of can, but I would know my way around, New Jersey like nobody's business. Now with GPS, I don't have to. So like when technology comes in and it replaces this shit, like, your short-term memory, you don't have to, I don't have to memorize certain things. I don't have to, I don't have to really do a lot of research. I can just Google it. Right now I'm writing scripts, and then I could throw it in Chat GPT to kind of tighten it up and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that is like taking, it's like, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Right.
So
that's evil stuff too, right? I mean, that's a deception. That's while it's a convenience, what it's doing is robbing us of our intelligence, because we're not relying on it. And we're of a generation where we had to remember stuff and we had to memorize stuff, but our kids' generation never had. So they're never going to have that knowledge.
Or counterpoint to that, maybe it's allowing us to think about other things.
It could, but
I'm just saying, like, we're having this conversation.
It's helping us. But we have to remember, we're able to critically think. The generations below us haven't been taught that, and not only that, if their electronics go, their minds are blank. They have no retained information. They wouldn't be able to get down the street. They wouldn't be able to find the school or the library or the gas station or the supermarket, because they don't know how to get there, because they've never taken the time to figure it out.
There would be a reset for sure, to put it mildly.
Right.
Oh yeah.
But the one thing, we're made in the image of our Creator, right? He made us in His image, and the brilliance of His mind is well beyond any of our capacities to even scratch the surface of the intricacy and the amazingness of everything He designed. But if we don't use our brains, we're just mush. And that's why they're talking about, hybrids with computers and stuff. And once that happens, it's over. And that was one of the reasons that there was the flood, because it was getting to the point that there was no more pure human DNA. And once that happened, it was game over.
I mean, the Neuralink, I see that being a big problem. It's like, dude, you're not linked up. It's like, you got to get linked up.
Well, that could be the mark of the beast. I mean, there's these things there's prophecy about all this stuff. And that's the crazy thing. There's prophecy. Stuff was written thousands of years ago, and it's coming true. And, maybe they didn't say it was Neuralink or it was AI, but when you look at it, these things are coming to pass.
Like what? Could you give an example?
Well, when you talk about the mark of a beast, that you got to take the mark of the beast, that could be a Neuralink. That could be AI. That could be all these different things that are taking over our brains, that we're now slaves to the machines, or we're slaves to whatever deception it is. And then it's game over. There's no connectivity to our Creator. And that's what gets us to our eternity, right? We were promised an eternity of beauty and wonder if we live the right way and we follow our Creator's way. Otherwise, we're cast into darkness, into the bottomless pit forever.
So do you think? I mean, because there's also a need for us, based on how we're built, to explore and invent and adapt.
Absolutely.
So, what we're creating, is an offshoot, of that ability to adapt to our environment. Dolphins, orcas, they're perfectly adapted. They don't have a need or want to create unless they need to. They'll create new methods of hunting. They'll create new languages. When they meet other pods, they'll just invent a whole new language and communicate. But beyond that, they don't have to, they don't need anything else. We, as the way we're built, if we can't survive, so we have to invent. We need tools. We need technology. So,
to an extent.
I don't think, but we can't turn that off, right? We're always going to want to be getting more, better, faster, so.
Well, that's our demise. That's the demise of the human race.
It possibly, there's an argument there, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, that's, sure. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we dropped 2 nuclear bombs, which is insane. Now that you think back on it, you're like, we dropped 2 nukes on real people, which is nuts. And, so we've got this, it's, our own nature and need to do this. Is it, what's driving, what's driving that? Is it good? Right. Is it evil? I don't know.
So Mike, we've got, not that there's a specific time limit on this, but we'll say roughly 15 more minutes ish. All right. So plans of action, everybody loves plans of actions, right? We're about, how do you get safer in this podcast? So Mike, how do we take everything that you're saying, all these deceptions, right? And how do we actually protect ourselves spiritually?
Well, I think it's a journey, and all I can try to do is shed some light. I don't have all the answers because I'm still on the journey myself, and I probably will be for the rest of my life because it's so vast. And I don't know the level of layers of deception that are out there. I think what you have to do is I think everybody individually has to reflect internally and look at what they believe and look to what has been told to them and try to see past that deception. I don't have the answers. I can't sit here and profess that I can make that answer. I know for me personally, I've gotten closer to God, and I've gotten closer to shedding a lot of vices and things that I had in my life because, through conversations with the Creator, He said, I can't be friends with you if you do those things. And that scared me. And, I'm not saying He said, I heard this voice say that, but it was in my head. And it was while I was praying and talking to Him, and it clearly came out of somewhere. And I look at that and I go, okay, wow, holy crow, so I think there's lines that are drawn, and I think we have to look at it, and everything isn't okay. Everything isn't okay. If it feels good, it doesn't make it okay. And I think we've been taught that in a way that it's okay if you're not bothering anybody, and it's a but there's things out there that are corrupting us. And I can't speak for anybody but myself, but I know that it's a reflective time, and it's going to take a long time to come to a place that hopefully we're at a place that we're in a spiritually good place. And it's like self-defense, right? If this was my first day trying to save and I'm saying to you guys, so how do I do it? What do I need to do? So tomorrow I'll be safe, right? And you're going to say, it's not going to take you tomorrow. It's going to take you years. You got to build your body. You got to understand how you need to protect yourself. and different techniques that you need if you're
It doesn't take years, Mike.
You know
It's kind of I know it's kind
you know
of
what I mean. My point is, listen, I grew up fighting, and I'm not the biggest guy on the planet. So, when somebody pushed me, I punched them. I took the first move and got the hell out of there. And that was the way I always defended myself. And, that's the way it works for me. But, thank God I haven't had to do it in a long, long time. But
so Mike, so rather than techniques and stuff, we like to deal on principles. So give everybody 5 principles if you can. I know it's hard, but give everybody listening 5 principles that they can do to protect themselves, to better prepare themselves spiritually for this war.
Or a technique to, what do you, how do you recognize when something's
how do you find the truth? There we go.
Well, that's a good question. I think it's one of the oldest questions out there, right? Seeking truth, right? I didn't invent that. We didn't invent that. That's been a journey, I think, since the beginning of time, is trying to find truth, right? And trying to find truth through the forest of misinformation, or whatever you want to call it. But I think you have to get centered in your own self and understand who you are. And I think you have to understand where you come from and what your values are, right? And I think you have to understand what you believe. And I think you then have to look at that and reflect on who you are and delve into whatever spirituality that you have. I'm not really a organized religion guy myself either. I think that's, there's that I have certain issues with that myself personally, and I'm not saying it's not good for other people, but I think you have to come to these conclusions yourself and go on that journey, and you have to open your mind. And I think you have to really look at what we've been told, and either you look at it and you believe it or you don't. And I think this thing, listen, this has been set up by a genius. The creator is the super genius, but under that, you have somebody else who's who's had thousands of years to practice this deception and instill it in everybody, where it becomes, I become the heretic and the crazy man because I'm saying what I'm saying, right? And people look at me and say, you're nuts, right? And that's the way it's designed. So I'm questioning things, and I'm not saying you guys are. You may be in your head going, this guy's crazy. And I wouldn't fault you for that. But I think when you look at that, you have to this is something that is well beyond a 30-minute or 60-minute or a 90-minute or even a 10-hour, a journey. And I think you have to unpack this stuff. And I think it takes time. And I think it does take a long time. Maybe you can have principles and you can get into a self-defense situation a lot quicker than you can physically, than you can spiritually, because I think it's been so much deception, and I think it's layered, and everybody's questioned it. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't.
So when I was, when I first started actually training with Carl, we would look at like everything with one, like, as whatever bizarre, like, systema or empty we're trying to look at everything. We're like, okay, let's look at this from the perspective of, what if this was based on some fact, right? What if this was based on some truth? And let's go find the truth, because it's very easy to dispel things as nonsense and bullshit when you first look at them. I mean, for the most part, but it's really, in my opinion, just an elevated exercise to look at something like, okay, this is based on something, let's go back, right? So when you start looking back at, from the beginning, and is creation, right? That's what we got. It's like, okay, instead of sitting here and being like, well, there's this, there's evolution, there's, Big Bang, there's all these, theories. Okay, let's just straw man this or steel man it and say, okay, what if that really happened, right? And then what evidence do we have to say that it doesn't, that it didn't? And when you look at archaeology, that would be my first place. I mean, they once you get into it, they don't know. Now that we're talking about Göbekli Tepe, which is earlier to, it's like 10,000 years old or whatever it is. They didn't think there was any structures, that predated the pyramids. And they can't even tell how old some of this shit is.
Right.
Anyway.
All the dates are just supposed. It's not.
Right.
There's no science behind any of that stuff.
No, and even like they'll say, like, even carbon dating is flawed at best. So when you're looking at this stuff and like all this stuff that we're like when we were growing up, we're like, hey, your biology, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens weren't even next to each other. Whatever, and now you're finding out that, oh wait, no, we all have like Neanderthal DNA in us. Whatever. So, okay, well, then what's a Neanderthal? Is it a giant? Is it another? It's another race. It's another. So, we've been accepting things as truth for decades, and they don't know. I mean, when I was kids, dinosaurs were big lizards. Now they're birds. What are we doing?
Right.
So it's changing constantly. So that
Right.
tells me they don't know.
Right.
So when you find out how many, actually, how hard it is to actually make a fossil, right? And you got the boneyard up in Alaska where there's like tons of these bones from all over the world that aren't supposed to be there. That would only suggest that, I don't know, flood came, swept them over. An ice age didn't, an iceberg doesn't kill a woolly mammoth, because a woolly mammoth sees an iceberg and he's like, all right, I'm just going to move over here. Because the thing isn't coming in at it's not coming in at 100 miles an hour. So, they don't know. Right. And, they act like they know. So I'm looking at this from the perspective of, let's make the assumption now that happened. And even when you go back to, we can go back and forth on Earth and planets. I mean, let's say, the F word, guys are talking about flat Earth. I'm not there yet there. But what I'm saying is that would make sense from a deception point of view, because back then it was like, the church, and that would be the biggest thing, that as the devil and God are vying for, or the devil's trying to capture men's souls, God is not. If he did, he would just take them, right? So, if they are vying for men's souls, given the time, like the earth is round is like scandalous. Like, it was crazy. Copernicus was like, you're nuts. That is, it wasn't like, oh yeah, okay, you're right. No, they wanted to like hang him until the church got involved and the church got his back. Again, I don't understand how that happened. Why the
think
church
about that totally goes against the teachings of the Bible. So think
Right.
about the church disavowing what was written in Genesis. That's a deception.
That's insane to me.
That's insane.
Looking at it,
That's
because
insane.
the church should never have done that.
Correct.
No, you guys are over it. But again, it's about
Correct.
power, control,
Correct.
and deception. And that's why, I partially, have this problem with the church, because, why are you getting involved in this? Right.
Correct.
If not for control. Again, discovering that the Vatican owns the largest telescope I think it's at University of Arizona, right? They have the largest telescope, and they've got another telescope that's it's acronym.
called El Diablo or something. It's got
It's called
picture.
Lucifer.
Correct.
Yeah.
So think about that.
Yeah, so,
I mean, there's I think there's so much to unpack here, and it's
the Vatican advanced technology telescope is in Arizona and named, hold on, I'm looking it up. Okay, yeah, Large Binocular Telescope, LBT, was, then it was shortened. It was Lucy, and then it was, at one point it was Lucifer was the acronym for it.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know why the Vatican has the world's largest telescope.
Right. Well, Lucifer is the bearer of light, right? It's like
right.
it's like the statue in New York City in the harbor. You know, the statue of Lucifer. When you look at that, it's another deception. And that thing's sitting right in the middle of New York Harbor.
And that whole thing is funny because people quote what's written on that as that's like our policy.
Right.
You know. So yeah, you know, and you're like, no, it wasn't about that. So Mike writes, why is it a bad thing to own a telescope? I would say it's a bad thing to own a telescope, Mike. I think it's interesting that the Vatican owns the largest telescope in the world, and it's in Arizona.
It's named Lucifer. It's not bad to have a telescope, but when you name it Lucifer, that's kind of suspect. You have to wonder why they would call it that.
I think the implication as well is that they're doing their own research and studies, but they're probably withholding the information.
Yeah.
Sure.
So why wouldn't they, you know, have a monopoly on information, which, as we know, is the most important commodity that, you know, right now, other than air and water, you know, and sunlight, which, you know, keep messing around.
I think part of the deception, we've been kept off balance, right? I mean, there's even a part where you, and this is a whole bit another thing, but our calendar is off. By the stars and the moon, it's a 28-day cycle of 13 months.
13 months, 28 days.
Right. Okay. And we've now 12 months with all so everything is off kilter. Our circadian rhythm has been disrupted permanently because of this. And, you know, the days should be the days. The sky and the sun and the moon mark the count. The moon marks the days and the months. And when a woman's cycle is 28 days. I mean, all these things align to nature and to the natural rhythm of what it's been. And we've been disrupted from that. And that was the Gregorian calendar in the 1500s. Pope Gregory changed the calendar from what nature intended, what the creator intended. I mean, he laid all this stuff out for us. He gave us the clock. It's a clock. If you look at it, I think it's in Prague. I think it's called the Prague. It's like some clock in Prague, but it's laid out that it's a celestial clock that everything, you know, you could keep time by it. And what is a sundial? I mean, a sundial is just a stick on the ground, and it catches the sun moving through the sky, and it lays a shadow on the time. I mean, it's as simple as that. You know, a compass. What does a compass do? A compass points north, magnetic north. There is no magnetic south. There's one pole. It's the North Pole. It's a magnetic north, and everything is circumnavigated around that. There's the north in the middle, and everything south, everything outside of the north is south in any direction. And then once you go around this way, it's north, it's east and west. That's the way a compass works. I mean, that thing is a device that is simple and natural. And think about that. There's a magnet in the north that pulls that needle in that direction. There's no battery in it. There's nothing in it. You hold that thing in your hand and it goes to the north. You could be in South America and that thing's going to pull to the north. Doesn't pull to the south. Doesn't go to some, you know, mysterious South Pole. There is no pole there. It's the north. Everything is there. And above the North Pole is Polaris, the North Star. And that's where God's throne is, above the heaven. And when you're within the Bible, that's what it states, that it's all there. And when you put that all into perspective, it grounds you, I think. And I think, you know, all these things are crazy, you know, ideas and thoughts. And people look at it and go, you're insane. What are you talking about? But when you really look at it, if you have to suspend everything you've thought and everything you've believed and look at it in a new way. And if you're able to do that, it simplifies it, right? It's Occam's razor. It's the simplest explanation. It's not the most craziest, fantastical, crazy explanation of things. It's the simplest things. And as innovative and technical and creative as our realm is, it's also very simple for us. But we've made it into this it's been made into this complicated thing for us not to understand it. And that's part of the deception. And that's part of what keeps us off balance and keeps us ungrounded, right? We're electromagnetic. We want to be grounded, right? That's why when you want to take your shoes off and get into the dirt, right? It grounds you, it energizes you, right? That's the energy source of the earth, right? We're part of that. And everything we've been designed, we wear rubber shoes, right? Everything's rubber now. What does it do? It separates us from the earth. It keeps us ungrounded, right? It keeps us off balance. And, and I think people are crazy, right? Good people have lost their minds, and maybe I'm one of them, but when you look at it, all this stuff it's right in front of us. And I don't know where it'll take me or take you guys or take everybody else. And I hope it takes us to a good place, but there's a lot of crazy stuff out there, and I'm just trying to come to grips with it and understand it and rationalize it. And this is where my journey's come. And I try to come through basis, as you do, Josh, of looking at things through facts and through proof and through concrete, whatever it might be, artifacts, looking at the sky. I look up, stuff's moving. I'm not moving. I'm on the ground. I'm on terra firma, and I don't feel that I'm moving. I mean, I know when I'm in a car, I'm moving. I know when I'm in a plane, I feel like I'm moving. I know when I'm walking, I feel like I'm moving. But when I'm standing still, I'm standing still. And everything else is moving around me. And, I think we've been deceived to believe that it's the opposite, that we're moving and everything else is standing still.
Well,
and,
I just, from a savior, I don't know, soul perspective. I mean, again, we focus on, the truth. I mean, when we're looking at self-defense, we're always looking for simple is what works. Simple is what's best. Right. So, now when we're, looking at, this again, because I'm really looking at it again, from a different perspective and trying to really trying to determine, what's deception and what's not. It could be everything, and that could drive you crazy.
Absolutely.
So I think, just as from a microcosm, just to kind of look at, just take like one thing, I mean, I started with, what if the stories were true, right? Look at the flood, right? So start going down, what the fuck? I see a Graham Hancock right off the tip of my tongue. Younger Dryas event, when they're talking about a big flood. I go, start there.
Absolutely.
Start, digging into it and see, look at archaeology. Look at, what they actually know. Look at if they've introduced any new hypothesis and theories. I mean, science is changing all the time, right? But then you look at the history of man, and it really hasn't changed. They'll be like, oh, we found a new bone, or we found a new this, or what else has been even, trying to figure out, trying to figure out what's been suppressed is impossible, but, start just questioning and just saying, hey, what if, what if there were giants? What if there were, what if people did live to be, hundreds of years old, before, when there was more oxygen and the world was different. I mean, we're reflecting on the world from, our reality, which wasn't the same reality.
Correct.
Let's just say pre-flood. So there's that. I mean, just trying to, and as again, coming through this is, trying to, and again, it all started with, I knew we were deceived. I knew corporations, lied. I knew they focused on profit, but at the sacrifice of how many people with what we went through with, with COVID, there's like bigger forces, at play, and besides what we're doing. So on that note, we'll stop it here for today. Mike, thanks for joining us. Much appreciated. George, good to have you. Good to have you back.
Verbose as always.
As always, just doesn't shut the hell up at all.
You know what though? I will say, like, listening, Mike, this is the first time I had a chance to listen to you, and that was some interesting stuff for sure.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, right? And I as I said, I'm still trying to unpack it, and I'm still thinking about it, and I don't know where it's going to take me. But I think that, as Damian said, you kind of have to look at things, and certain things will spur you on to think further. And I think that we want to end up in a strong place. We want to be strong mentally, physically, and protect ourselves mentally and physically as well as spiritually. And that's the trick. And I think we have to continue to endeavor on that journey. And hopefully we all get there. But we have to look. We can't be so naive to think that there's no evil out there and everything is fine and everybody's here to protect us and help us, right? They're not. They're here to hurt us and kill us and make us.
And there are people that the best intentions. They think the worst is they think they're doing good, right?
Well, what's the saying? The road to hell is paved.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Yep. But Josh, I'm telling you, put your mask on because it's for your own good.
Right.
That's it. And Josh didn't have his mask on, and he was standing too close to another person. And I'm doing this for his own good. And by the way, Josh is a Jew, and you should take him in too. Shit like that, where you're like, yeah, it's not that far. When that was we've talked about this before. That's what freaked me. I'm like, I never thought like Nazi Germany could happen in the United States, and we were damn near close. Damn near close.
We still are. I mean, you never know. I mean, it's just one. It's one crazy step away. I think we're heading in the right direction. And back to Josh's talk a couple of weeks ago about the long game of communism. That's a big threat too. I mean, that's been corrupting people's minds and deceiving people's minds too over generations. The same way, right? That's been an indoctrination generationally to move us away from our understanding of freedom into a world of totalitarianism and communism.
Yep. All right, then, Josh, any last words? Final words?
I mean, there's always lots to say, but we'll just finish.
Yeah. All right. Good enough.
I appreciate the time, guys. I'm sure we're more confused than we started. So thank you.
Of course. Okay. Everyone's like, what the hell just happened? I'm like, yeah, that just happened. Everyone, thanks for joining in. We'll be good to go next week. Until next time, train honestly. Take care.